like to say thanks. First thing I'd like to say is thank you for having us. This isn't exactly going to be a tour, but it's going to try and summarize the work that we've been doing as part of the Great Eastern Parks route, where we've called it a study for rewilding and activating community infrastructures, and hopefully you'll understand a little bit why we've sort of come up with that statement. I'd also like to say that this has all been developed as a collaboration between many different people. So although I represent EBBA Architects, there's quite a few different people, especially within the community, that have helped to get it to where it is now. So these are just some of the takeaways that I'd like you all to get from this talk, but it's also an idea about the wider ambitions for the work that we're doing. So it's primarily about trying to connect green spaces along what we're calling the Great Eastern Parks route. Part of this is to look at ways that we can reinstate some of the disused viaducts for new purposes, one of which I'll go through as a case study as part of this talk. We'd also like to promote sustainable and green strategies for reusing some of these infrastructures, to create new community and educational assets with learning and practical training opportunities for locals and community groups, to support rewilding and the greening of our urban areas so that people can have access to more green spaces, and to champion the possibility of a green network across East London. So the project is supported by the East London Garden Society and the Countryside Charity London. So they've been instrumental in this, and we've, as architects, have been supporting this entirely, voluntarily. So all of this work that we're doing, we're simply doing to try and really get this project off the ground. And I should also mention that there should be a thank you to the wider network of individuals who've kindly offered their time. So, and this involves people that are helping with trying to raise money, doing the online social media, all of that thing. So the vision for the Great Eastern Parks route is the idea of creating a new public green space, which will start at the Bishopsgate Goodyard, which is the start of a really exciting new east-west trail. And the trail would be a number of, would help to connect an existing number of green spaces, which we're calling stepping stones, which would allow people to walk from the city throughout East London to the countryside. Our main aim is to try and help connect communities to these green spaces, encourage people to walk, and help to improve the quality of some of the neglected open spaces. Here we can see a version of the route which highlights the potential to being able to open up and connect green spaces across East London. The map has been produced by the Countryside Charity, and its main aim is to promote and help create access to high quality green spaces which provide many benefits for health and well-being. It can also help to create clean air, provide healthy walking routes and spaces for outdoor exercise. Never has this been more important than nowadays, when we're living through quite difficult times. And as London grows, we want to be able to protect and connect these green spaces so that we can increase the benefits that they provide and the enjoyment for many generations to come. I thought I would describe a little bit about who we are. So we're an architecture practice working at very different scales and sectors. We're particularly interested in social, environmental, public, and education projects, although we've been known to do work in the arts and fashion sectors. What's unique about our practice is that we work on very diverse types of projects and use the things that we learned and apply them at different contexts. We've developed a wide network of artists, makers, and fabricators who bring specialisms to each of these projects. And we're very keen to support community-led projects as a way of helping good design reach more people, often those that need it most. Our collective form of practice extends to teaching and making at both the physical and theoretical level, which has become an important aspect of the work of the studio, where we're able to test and explore ideas while allowing an ongoing investigation into the role of architecture in society. These 3 projects represent some of the projects that we've done. They happen to be schools in some form or other. The first on the left is a renovation of a school that we completed in Spain as a self-build. The one in the middle is an image of the extension that we designed for a nursery. And on the right is a construction skills centre that we're currently working towards for delivering a skills school on the edge of the Olympic Park. So the East London Garden Society is headed by Jeffrey Juden. It's a community-led group, and their hope is to improve, promote and campaign for a greener East London. Some of the projects that they're looking to support is the Limehouse Triangle, which is on the left. They're trying to create a biodiversity park. The middle project is the Millwall Park Viaduct, which I'll talk about soon. And then on the right, it's the campaign that they led to try and support a public park as part of the Bishopsgate Goods Yard development, which you can see here. Most of you probably know the area. This is Shoreditch High Street, and just behind where the original goods yard ended, which connected the Great Eastern Railways, is now planned for a huge multi-billion-pound development. And part of this development is going to be a new park, which the East London Garden Society successfully campaigned for creating what will be Europe's largest forest garden. So along with others involved in these projects, we all share an interest in wanting to promote nature and well-being. We all have these really beautiful images in our mind of trying to create this functioning green route that emanates from the centre of the city, which could be made reality through quite simple interventions. Not only that, but we also see these opportunities as a way of supporting education and community groups through various initiatives. So as mentioned previously, the Great Eastern Parks route aims to create a green network that can connect existing green routes, starting from Shoreditch High Street, travelling all the way east through to the Royal Docks, and even to the tip where East London meets the Thames at Island Gardens. Here you can see the 2 sort of extremes of the route. The initial one would be starting from Shoreditch High Street station, connecting across an existing disused viaduct all the way to Mile End. And then an extension of that, we're seeing ways of how we can connect existing green networks through all of these different routes as a way of creating green infrastructures. So an example of such opportunities is the Millwall Park Viaduct. It's a section of disused railway that used to be part of the Great Eastern Railways route. And the next part of the presentation will describe some of the possibilities this offers, with the intention for this study to explore the potential of how we can do other things like this along the route. Just as a general note, before I move on, we've developed these ideas around some of the practical ways that we believe the existing viaduct could be opened and activated. But it's quite important to understand that we want this project to get support from the local communities, and we want them to have a steer on the way it develops. So these ideas are things that we've started, we've spoken to key stakeholders, but at the end of the day, we want this to be a project that's really led by the community. It is an asset which is owned by the council. As I said, it's an existing viaduct which used to be part of the lightweight rail network. It's a 300-metre viaduct, and it shows that there's huge potential to do something with this. Everyone probably knows the High Line in New York, a really successful strategy for greening and activating an existing disused railway. And we've used these ideas as a way of translating some of the parts into our project. The site itself has a very quite well kept green space. As well as that, it's got a children's park, which is next to the school, which also offers opportunities to create learning and educational purposes for the children that use the park. The existing connection is the Island Gardens tube station, DLR station. And through this, we find really good opportunities to actually not only bring more people to the park, but also find ways of actually creating new businesses, new learning opportunities that can really create a new sort of economy within this area. These are examples, photos of the existing site. As you can see, there are these quite large existing arches. The access above here isn't currently possible, but what's quite interesting is that the height of the walls currently lend themselves very well to getting people up there. So really this project is about how we can start to think about creating these connecting points and how some of the disused arches can be used for new uses. Again, we're quite inspired by these images because we can very easily imagine this space being this quite wild and lovely green park, which the community can use. So I'd like to describe the project in sort of three different parts. One of them being a new public park, which would create the green route for people to use. An element that we find quite interesting is the idea of a beekeeping school. As it's International Bee Day, it also seemed quite relevant to talk about this. And then also the idea of a centre for learning, which could be a space that can be used by the community for various uses. So to sort of summarise our ideas about this project, it's really about creating a new raised green route, to propose a meadow that can be a way of supporting insects and fauna. As I mentioned, sustaining bees in these hives could create new jobs through the production of honey, mead. As an educational tool, there's really amazing opportunities that we could sort of provide for local communities within the area, as well as the schools. Improving access to nature, considering how we can use the viaduct and the arches, and then most importantly, creating a space that the community can use and activate. So as part of the research that we've done, we've started to map out registered local beekeepers and a wider network, which is a community looking to support beekeeping within London. And this offers opportunities not just for the economic benefits, but also for social. I think bringing people closer to nature, actually having them involved, really allows them to understand the importance of this for a more green and sustainable future. And then within the area, we've got a really good network of existing communities which can support parts of these ecological projects. The image on the right is a school in Northampton where they've been using beekeeping as a way of providing educational assets and tools. So as part of our investigation, we're looking at ways to create access onto the existing viaduct. So the viaduct is this 300-metre disused railway. And as part of the initial investigations, we were looking at ways that we could possibly include allotments. Unfortunately, due to the height and of the railings, we think that it's really only possible to have low soil depths, which would allow for a more meadow type of vegetation, which we've explored through ways that we could consider replanting along the route. And this is another example of a really lovely garden by Dan Pearson that starts to give an idea of how we're thinking about how this space could be activated. So within our studies, we've been thinking about ways that we can get access and separate the viaduct to create not only a public space, but ways that we can keep hives in a controlled area. And these are some of the examples of ways that we look at connecting these different routes. So The option A was exploring ways that the whole viaduct would be part of the route. This is looking at ways to segment it so that we can create different pockets within the existing viaduct. And as part of our work, we're constantly trying to think of ways to reimagine these infrastructures so we can really start to think about how people might engage and connect with this space. So not only would we create a viaduct which has this green route, but we can also think about the spaces beneath it start to offer opportunities for new businesses, community halls, all these things that really would create a hub within this area. And we're always finding opportunities to create something architectural and special. So these would be examples of these towers that essentially would act like advertisement boards. So you can imagine this way of creating a route up to it would also offer opportunities to have a space to show exactly what we're doing on this viaduct. And then as part of the study, we're also looking at the technical aspects. So how do we actually provide space and the infrastructure to create the meadow, as well as thinking about access, opportunities for almost having this park above there with benches and little pockets that people could use. And then again, images of inspiration that we think would really sort of lend themselves to this space. This is a view of the space activated and thinking about how people would come up and use it. So it would not only be a community space, but it could also create this park, which would be a destination for people to come and use. And then finally, this is just a view of the possibility of this existing viaduct being activated with rewilding and creating pockets for people to use. So I think I'd like to open up to some questions. I know we sort of described it as a route, but actually what we're trying to talk about here is how we can think about creating opportunities within this wider network. And it'd be really good to get some feedback or some questions about how you think we can really get this project off the ground. As I mentioned before, this is a community-led project, and we're doing this all self-funded, but we're trying to really get some momentum to see how we can open up some of these disused infrastructures. So I'm going to try and get the chat open. I don't know if there's an opportunity for people to send questions.
Yeah, you've got a couple of questions in there already about one saying, how are you going to, or how would farmed honeybees impact on the wild bee population?
Mm-hmm. That's a question that's come up a fair few times, and I know that London itself is actually overpopulated by hives, but part of the issue is that they're not all managed effectively. And I think our aim is to create a nationwide beekeeping school, which is a destination for people to come and learn about keeping bees. So it's not necessarily primarily to promote bees themselves, but it's what can be done with them.
There's a good question from Dilip Lakhani. Would Dilip like to unmute himself and ask the question?
Hello, hi. Fantastic project, really amazing. Thank you. Sorry, I'm in the middle of cooking with Mum, so you might hear the background. She's cooking bitter gourd. Listen, I'm just wondering, just in terms of your planting typology, you just wondering if you have a plants person on board, and you've thought about a meadow typology, and it seems odd for a raised platform, really, which is in a sense, if you like, a limestone pavement. And just wondering if you thought about steppe or Mediterranean garrigue typologies instead.
I must admit, you sound like you know way more than I know about plants, and I knew this question would come up. We haven't had any, that's not true. We've had some advice on what might be possible,
Yeah.
But as I said, we're sort of in the initial stages of the project. This is all, you know, blue sky thinking about
Lovely. Okay.
what we could possibly do. But if you're saying you're a specialist, I mean, please, if you can share some advice and some support, or if you know anyone that might be interested, by all means, that would be really helpful.
Well, I'll get in touch. There we are. Okay, fantastic. Take care. Have a good one. I've got to go. Yeah, cheers.
Okay.
Take care. Bye.
Okay, what about Laura? Laura's got a good question here. Have we considered adding small water bodies? Laura, would you like to ask your question and pitch in? Laura, can you unmute yourself? She can. You're off. But she's not saying anything.
I can see the question. I mean, it is a really good question. Have you considered adding small water bodies to make small pond areas which could be visited by birds and insects? Also, in your planting, have you factored in planting to favour pollinators all year round? So I guess the question about ponds, I think it's a lovely idea. I think any way that we can create a more biodiverse environment, the better. And I think not only for the birds, but I think water also creates really lovely places. You know, people are attracted to water. So I think it's something that we would definitely consider. And that might possibly be something that comes through the community engagement as well. I think for us, we want to think about strategies that wouldn't need too much management. That's not to say that water isn't, you know, easily kept, but it's just something that we would need to think about.
Well, Benni, you've got a couple of questions which are around the use of the word rewilding. So I don't know, would Penny or Talia like to pitch in with this? Either of you? And the other thing is, if anyone wants to put their video back on, I mean, it is being recorded. So if you don't wish to appear in the recording, then keep your video off. But if you're happy to appear in the recording, it actually helps Benni and I to actually see who you are, because it's quite galling talking to a screen. And Benni, can you change the image as well on the screen, or do you?
Of course, yeah.
Or stop sharing screen, whichever. Or maybe
I can stop.
leave it like that. Well,
oh.
Okay, whichever. Okay, well that's great. A few people have appeared in our vision. So is Laura or Penny or Talia there to ask the question?
Yes, sure. Hi. So I've just moved next door to the router. So if I disappear, then that's my terrible internet. I have a question about community buy-in and what you see as the biggest obstacle. So, because as someone who's very pro rewilding, I know that's sometimes a term that can sort of stick with a lot of people, and that it's interesting when rewilding is used in an urban context, which is very rarely used. So just I'd like to hear your opinion on whether that's been an issue, whether that's been a question, and what those kinds of obstacles, if there's been any community buy-in obstacles to date.
Mm-hmm. I'll start by answering the community buy-in. We've had very, very good response generally from the people that we've talked to about the project. For example, we've done one public presentation, albeit to about 10, 15 people, but it was people that are interested in the project and want to see it happen. We haven't spoken to the schools or to people directly involved in the upkeep of the park, but we've got a good relationship with the Friends of Island Gardens, which happens to be just to the south of that park, and they're all for the project. So I think that there is good support generally for wanting to do something. I think there's a lot of impetus to try and get people to the park and for them to stay. And I think something like this would lend itself to that. I think creating a space up on this viaduct that might be a series of pockets with parks and benches would definitely allow people to come and spend a bit more time there, which might then, help some of the businesses that are around the area. In terms of rewilding, we use it as a term that in some ways, the viaduct itself is already going through a process of rewilding, because what's amazing is that nature will grow anywhere. And that's what I find quite powerful. As a sort of side thing, I did my final master's thesis on Detroit, which is a city that went through deindustrialization and essentially nature took over again. And what's interesting about the term rewilding in America is that they see it almost as a punishment, that nature's taking over for all the sins that they did. And I've never come across that here. I think the idea of rewild, I don't know, maybe you, seeing as it's something that you're interested in, maybe you can comment a little bit on the term.
Well, my main sort of acquaintance with the term is more in, for in Scotland and wider spaces and reintroduction of native animals like beavers and wolves and lynxes. So that's generally the term that I use it towards and use it in. So I think, and I'm really interested in looking at what rewilding can happen in urban context, but I think it's interesting looking at this concept of wilderness and how you can then apply that to an urban space, and with architecture and with community buy-in and with people involved in that as well.
Yeah, I mean, this whole project has huge potential. We've talked a lot about this one section, but actually the part that connects Shoreditch High Street to Mile End has an existing railway viaduct, which technically, if someone opened the gate, you could walk, and it's already gone through that process of rewilding. It's got lots of vegetation, it's got green, it's got trees. So I think it would be about finding a balance of creating a route that doesn't feel completely manicured. I think it would be quite interesting for it to have that element of wilderness, which is something that you get in, I'm pointing towards, sorry, what's it called now? It's gone now. Out east near Stratford. So yeah, I think it will be interesting to get buy-in in terms of what we really describe as rewilding. I think people are supportive of these green routes, and how those strategies happen, we're unsure at the moment, and how much it would cost to get all that to work. But yeah, I mean, if you've got any further thoughts or interest in the project, by all means, please let us know.
Okay, Hugh, you've got a question there. Would you chip in there?
Oh, hi. Thanks, Andrew. Hi, Benni. Thanks. First I've heard of the project. It's really exciting, and in a way, of course, there's the practicalities, the kind of how to realize it, but also I think there's so much value in bringing in the community ethos that you're bringing to it, and in putting the idea out there. And if you get enough people along that route invested in the idea, then it will happen at some point. Maybe in kind of incrementally in stages as opportunities arise and the funding's available and so on. I had a question about the education side of things. Do you have anyone? I just thought about Global Generation and their work with the Story Garden now behind the British Library and the Paper Garden in Bermondsey, and they seem to be. I mean, I'm sure that there's lots of people doing that kind of education, working in forest schools and so on, but they seem to. They're a project that I know about who are really doing great things with youth engagement and educating young people and through gardening and growing and all this type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that we're exploring, and Geoff, who is going to be on the call as well, I would say he's the sort of real engagement guy. He's the one that got us involved, and
right.
But saying that, I think that to really get this project off the ground, we need someone that's going to do this, pretty much full time. And at this stage, we're just trying to gather momentum. We've done this talk just to speak to people like you who clearly know that we need a lot of support. I know those two projects really well. I know the people involved, and It's taken a while, but I think once momentum builds and we do get different people who are willing to, at the beginning, offer their time voluntarily, eventually we can look to get grants from the Good Growth Fund. We can get stuff from, you know, so we've definitely made really big steps in the last sort of 6 months. It's just unfortunate that we haven't managed to get into those funding opportunities just yet. You know, as you probably know, they were, you know, the rounds ended a couple of months back. So I think once they open up again, we'll certainly go in for those things. And I think it's small pockets of money that will really help this become a reality. And it's just about taking bit by bit. We're fortunate that the whole of the route that I just described is within Tower Hamlets. So we're dealing with one council. If we can get buy-in from the council, and I'm sure eventually, you know, once we show all the benefits that it will have, I'm sure we'll hopefully, you know, get real impetus to make it happen. The other people are, you know, the Network Grail, the Archco, people that manage all of the existing viaducts. So we've had conversations with those people as well, and generally they've been very supportive. But yeah, it's just through people like me, our team, others, that we're really trying to get this off the ground. So again,
really cool. If
you've got any advice or you want to share some insights, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, it's great to find out about it. I'll be following, and if anything, if I see any opportunities, then I'll certainly throw them over.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
Has anyone else got any suggestions or examples of community initiatives that have been successful at attracting funding, which might be on a similar scale or a similar type of initiative? We did a piece of work a long time ago for Lambeth, which was looking at Loughborough Junction, which is also a bit of a railway line up on arches. And what was really interesting there was that we started looking at how much leftover space there is when you start to look at junctions. And then we started to look at twinning junctions, and that was a hugely successful thing to do. We got people putting forward similar railway junctions and motorway junctions and highway junctions from all over the world to show how what is basically redundant space was call it rewilding or cultivated into allotment. So if anyone's got any sort of examples or suggestions that they could share with us, that would be great. I was just going to ask a question about whether there was an opportunity you could prototype something, or you know, whether you could just do a kind of demo project, you know, or a scaled model. You know, is there not something you could do, you know, which might have a kind of artistic look about it, but give everyone a chance to sort of imagine it more?
Yeah, I mean, we can always think about ways to you know, make something feel physical. In reality, we should just let people walk part of the route, which all we need to do is open a couple of gates. It's really as simple as that. So I think if we can get enough people to want to do it, then hopefully they will, even if they just opened it for a weekend, just to give people that experience. For me, when I first found out about the existing viaduct between Shoreditch High Street and Mile End, I was just blown away to know that there was something there. It's so hidden, so concealed that unless you know it's there, it's just really hard to find. So I think that would be one of the most interesting things, to really sort of get up there and walk it. For various reasons, we've actually chosen the Millwall Viaduct because I'm not entirely sure, but I think the council owns it, and therefore all they need to do is you know, lend it to us, you know, essentially give us access to it. We'd have to work out how we get up there, but I think that really offers the prototype for what can be done elsewhere. And of a certain size, that it's not too big, but actually it can create a really great park. And that's part of the reason why we've spent so much time really trying to develop that.
Okay, so a question from Andy Rutherford. Do you want to unmute yourself, Andy, and tell us what your question is?
Oh, here we go. Hello, good afternoon. Thanks very much. Yeah, just in the approach to rewilding, which is very interesting, but also very challenging, of course. Just wondering what your approach is to the types of trees that you'll be considering and how that's going to fit into the different aspects and parts of the plans. I'm
going to be totally honest here. I'm an architect and designer. I'm not a landscape or plant specialist. And I know this is obviously part of the Urban Tree Festival, but I'm not the right person to ask this sort of question. I'm sure you know much more than I do in terms of what's... but I think it's a valuable question. I mean, we need to make sure that whatever we're proposing, you know, is sustainable, will survive, will produce the kind of environment that we want there, you know, allowing insects, fauna, all of that stuff to really thrive. So it's something that we've always talked about. At the moment, we haven't had that input from a specialist, but as the project moves forward, it's something that, you know, is vital for us to be able to make it work. So okay. if you know a specialist, then a
lot of the festival is full of them.
Exactly, so, I know.
I'm going to say that we're not short of a few tree specialists.
No.
You have to dig them out. In fact, you're a bit unlucky. I was thinking we might actually have Greg Packman on the call, but he's not. But okay, so anyone else want to chip in with anything, or are we all sort of desperate for the slope off to the pub? Oh no, we can't slope off to the pub. That's
Andrew.
You can't slope off to the pub. Oh no, that's a disaster, isn't it? You can't slope off the pub.
Just rubbing it in now.
Yeah, exactly. Well, actually, so anyone else got any other questions they want to chip in? Penny, do you want to come in and give them a lesson in language, vocabulary, or are you not? Penny, do you want to talk about it? Yep, great.
No, I just think there's a real problem with this word rewilding, because that is about letting nature do whatever it's going to do and perhaps reintroduce different species. Whereas it seems to me what you're talking about is greening, a green corridor, which certainly from the pictures and things you showed, is much more managed, and it would probably be far more appropriate for the community involvement that you were talking about. I know rewilding is a very fashionable word at the moment. It seems to get attached to everything. I'm not sure it's always the right one.
No, I think I mean, we're essentially doing both. I can't see us being able to manage the process of the growth of nature along the whole of this route, not in the short term anyway. But I certainly take your point on board. I think we have had some questions about whether rewilding is the right use of term. I think in terms of parts of the route, that process has already happened, and we're sort of looking at ways that we can activate those spaces. But I think it's really helpful to get your view across, and I think that perhaps it is better to consider calling it greening. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Is that Carmel? Carmel, you have to unmute yourself. Carmel. Or we can unmute you.
Thank you. Yeah. I certainly agree with the last speaker about the rewilding term. I think it can be it can be off-putting and complex. My interest in this would be as a walker. I've made a comment on the chat that actually to promote opportunities to walk through the city, to link things up, which I think is part of the bigger plan you referred to at the beginning, would also have a lot of appeal to other groups, other interests, And that would be something, particularly now we're all concerned about ways of traveling around cities, that anything that emphasizes opportunities to walk, to link up, is another angle that could get other bodies interested apart from those who are concerned purely with flora and fauna. So that's particularly my interest as a determined walker, but also someone who's interested in health in cities.
No, for sure. I think that is another big aspect of what we're trying to do, and we have been trying to lobby already, particularly with the Green Party. Hopefully, the mayor will have this as part of his manifesto when it comes up. So Jeffrey Juden has been very good at trying to get the message out, and one of the things is green infrastructures, green routes, green transport. I mean, wouldn't it be amazing to be able to walk this route for people living out east to be able to get into the central London via green route? So yeah, I'm excited by that as well. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so there's a few more points coming up, which is great. Gonzalo, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Gonzalo, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Hello, Benni. Really good presentation. I don't know if you can hear me. Yeah. I wanted to make a point because there are like some very good examples in terms of architecture of rails that have been like repurposed for as green area. One of them, probably the most famous one, is the Highland Park in New York. But also we have seen like some bits in Cold Drops near King's Cross. In both cases, they were projects that were led by private developers in order to kind of like greening the area in and trying to find like commercial like success behind. You mentioned that there are like different like bits of these railways in East London, and they are leading towards Canary Wharf. I mean, I was thinking like obviously in Canary Wharf, it's owned by a private real estate developer. And I was wondering whether you would consider like working on areas that are privately owned, or whether like working on those instances might jeopardize like the principles. And it might be taken as well, we've all heard about like this concept of greenwashing, and whether it might like be like a risk and have like a wider impact.
I mean, the question really would come down to whether the community would be happy with that. I think that these projects that we've been developing are primarily community-led. At least we want them to be. I think it's about getting a balance. And there are, you mentioned examples, someone else mentioned one in Paris, which has been very successful. And yes, I mean, if we can get support from bigger bodies that would be able to make some of these happen, I wouldn't necessarily say no to that, as long as you say, it doesn't want to jeopardize the overall ambition for this project. But for this to really be a success, we do need, very big bodies and people to support it. I think that it should be part of a manifesto that wants to support green routes throughout East London, which should link into people like TfL or Network Rail, people that have to also make their sort of quota of green transport, which this project is calling out to be used for. So yeah, we'll see. Hopefully this message will get out there.
Thank you.
All right, well, look, thanks to everybody for chipping in. And I think what we should do now is wrap it up and just say a big thank you to Benni, who stepped in right at the last minute, really, because as I say, with COVID-19, the plans were to do all sorts of different things, a walk and a presentation, all the rest of it. So that's great. Some good stuff here. We'll save the chat. And also, as I say, the recording will be up on the Urban Tree Festival YouTube channel. There's still quite a lot going on. We're literally halfway through the festival. So please go back to the Urban Tree Festival site sign up to other things. We've got a tour that's actually sold out or booked out, which is on ancient trees in London, but we've managed to persuade Greg Packman to come back and do it again on Saturday. So if you're disappointed having tried to sign up on it, I think it's tomorrow evening. If you'd like to sign up again, then it's going to be available on Saturday. And we're also rerunning the Living with Trees webinar, which some of you may well have signed up for last Sunday, which was hit by the Zoom spike. And that's coming back again on Saturday evening. So please do have a look and visit the Urban Tree Festival site again. And thanks very much for all of you, and especially to those who have donated. And my little plea about sloping off to the pub was, I was just going to say that if you imagine you did buy Benni a beer, you wouldn't have much change from a £5. So why don't you slap down a £5 into our donation box? That would be great. But otherwise, visit the Urban Tree Festival site and come along to other events. And thanks very much to Benni again.
Thank you. Thank everyone. Thank you for listening.
All right. All the best, everyone.
Cheers.